Hi, it's nice to see a few of you in here today. And just to let you know, this does get recorded. So if you ask questions, they may appear. I'm going to run this a little differently today in that I would like you, if you want to, you can ask a question verbally. There are just a couple of you, so that might be really helpful if something comes up. So you can just opt to uh, do that. So let me make sure that if you want to, you can chat. So I'm going to do my unmute just so that you have the option, but you can also keep it muted. Okay. All right. So to start off this meeting today, I actually have a little agenda which I posted to our course site in the announcements. And the first thing I want to address, and this won't take too long, is this idea of the question mark in a title. And the question mark in a title, it's it's problematic when we look at arguments, because an argument by its very nature is taking a strong position. And so if you're taking that position, but your title offers a question mark at the end of the title, then that suggests that it's up to the reader, or maybe you're not decided, right? And the whole point is that you're trying to persuade others to your viewpoint. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I've just come up with 3 different types of titles here, and I'm going to zoom in just on the section that we're currently in. All right. Oh, you're also seeing that, yeah, I'll get back to those first 2 topics in a second. But here are, let me zoom it out just a little bit. There we go. So here are the question mark in an argument paper title. Now, if we were, this I've seen, this is my own title because I don't want to, highlight any students who might make them feel uncomfortable. But I saw a lot of question marks in the title of our position papers this past week. So when we look at this title, Who Should We Save During COVID-19? It's certainly thought-provoking, but it doesn't give the perspective of the writer, right? And so a way to do this, and a way to do it for academic audiences and to still be creative, is something like this, right? 65 and under, the lives that matter. When you write something like this, it's thought-provoking as well, but it also signals the position that you're taking. And in academic papers, we often use a 2-part title. It's pretty formal, but it also allows you to introduce the idea of what the paper's about, and then follow that up with the position that you take, okay? And so here it's 65 and under, the lives that matter. So this is for like a basic argument, right? Basic argument kind of title. It can go, it can work for a lot of different forms of arguments. The third title I developed specifically for proposing a solution. And with the proposing a solution, you want to signal in your title that, hey, you are actually offering a plan. So, or you can use signal phrases like plan, proposal, uh, a step-by-step guide, right? There are lots of ways that we could signal that we are presenting a proposal to our audience. And here then we also have that 2-part sentence, right? So if you notice, it's exactly the same, the first part, who should we save during COVID-19? But note that the question mark doesn't come at the end of the title, because the point of presenting an argument is that you are offering in here the solution, but you generally are offering your viewpoint. So that's why a question mark doesn't work, because it doesn't offer your viewpoint. So a triage plan for a hospital short on equipment, right? And so that signals that I'm going to be considering who we should save during COVID-19, and then developing a triage plan that hospitals might be able to use if they're falling short. For instance, right now, we seem to have enough respirators, but we don't have enough kidney dialysis machines. So what are the protocols that a hospital might adopt um, to see which patients will get those dialysis machines, right? And so that would be one way we could begin with a really compelling title that begins to shape your argument. So the title really does matter. It's part of your argument, and you can do a lot with the title in order to have it impact your paper and be intriguing to your reader. You always want to make sure that your title actually offers the topic that you're considering. If it could be applied to a million different things, then your reader might pass it by because they have no clue what you're writing about, and they're not going to spend the time to figure out if it's worth their time, right? So I want to just briefly show you a few other titles that I have. Desktop, Microsoft Word. Going to Google Chrome. Okay, I'm gonna go to here, and I'm trying to move around all these little windows that are popping up from Zoom. All right, so I just went in and pulled a couple articles that I've written previously, and here's a title I wrote for literary criticism, and it's this first half of the title is in quotes because it is not my title initially. It's actually used by another author in the past, so I put it in quotes to um, credit somebody else, right? So the penalties of a well-known name. So there's the topic, right? And then I give more details: Lita's celebrity and a sensational friendship, so that you have more of a sense of what the article is about. Here's another one: a mediated intimacy, Dinah Mullet-Craik and celebrity culture, right? So mediated intimacy suggests that just like what we're doing now in terms of Zooming, and we're kind of simulating, it's a simulacrum of a classroom space, which figures to promote intimacy, but it really isn't quite intimate. It's the same thing with celebrities and their fans. So this also gives you an idea of what the paper's about, okay? And related to that, I will share one other screen just on the title right now. There it is. Okay. I just have to pull it over so I see it too. There we go. So bridging the gap, see that colon? That colon's important. Bridging the gap means like closing that gap, right? And here, the case for implementing equity-minded academic and mentoring support services for foster youth within university writing programs. This is a lengthy title, but in the book that it's coming out in, it's important to have that length of a title because it signals basically a justification for a program that a colleague and I started at UCR. And we also offer, because we use the term case, it's signaling that it's also a case study. So it's sort of proposing for others a plan they can adopt, okay? So this is part proposing a solution and part arguing a position paper in terms of the extraordinary needs and that we feel foster youth on university campuses have to increase their support services above and beyond other student groups, okay? So are there any questions about titles? Let me see if, maybe make sure I have the screens up. Chat. Should we say, could you, if, oh, there we go. There's a one. Chat. Perfect. No, all good. Okay, so great. Thank you. So because more than half the class really, could improve on their titles, I thought it was important to at least work through that. All right, so let me look at the next topic we want to go into, and we're going to spend a little bit of time here, is this idea of what good argument research looks like. Particularly, we can look at proposing a solution, but also in terms of peer-reviewed scholarship, what academic research looks like versus, a paper that might not be for an academic audience. And that's why it's important that you review your rhetorical situation. And so if you return to your St. Martin's Guide and you look at the page 2, if you have the whole ebook, it breaks down the rhetorical situation, and it emphasizes how important it is to spend the time up front figuring out your goals for this paper, as well as who your audience is, in what context you'll be composing, for what occasion, right? And so if you're composing for an academic audience, which you are, and if you're composing at a university for a composition class, all of this signals that you need to be using formal academic writing. You need to be using texts that academics find credible and that the general, population would turn to for an informed, well-researched, well-respected source, right? So blog sites aren't a good source because they are not in any way vetted, in any way. When you're looking at personal examples, if you find some on a blog site, that would be appropriate. But as far as moving beyond anecdotes or your own personal story or others, blog sites aren't on the table. Encyclopedias aren't on the table. We're in college. Encyclopedias actually basically sum up the research, sum up the history documents that others have read or that are primary texts, and provide that to you. In college, the expectation is that you're going to those primary documents like the Constitution, like the Bill of Rights. You're going to, a perspective that a historian takes or a philosopher takes, that you're not just reading a summary of that through an encyclopedia, be it Wikipedia, be it Encyclopedia Britannica. This extends into websites like history.com or even the CQ Researcher, the summations of various topics. Those are not peer-reviewed scholarly works. They are popular. Greenhaven Press, that's popular. Those could be appropriate for offering certain perspectives, but again, you want to be elevating your research into the more academic realm and into the forms of journalism that are well respected, okay? So when we work, for instance, on a position paper, think tanks are often a really great resource, and think tanks are like the Heritage Foundation. But if you're going to be incorporating think tank research, you also need to signal in your paper that, hey, this is a conservative group with the goal of pushing for less big government. And so anything they're going to be sharing is going to have that bias. And you need to signal that in your paper, okay? And you need to know it yourself, because otherwise you may be taking it as a blanket fact or a generally acknowledged perspective, but that's not the case. It's a particular perspective. And if you're getting that particular conservative perspective, you also might want to take a look at a more liberal perspective as well. So, you know, even Googling liberal think tanks uh, or liberal policy researchers or something like that will also get you to those types of think tanks. But let's first of all review, how do we find peer-reviewed research? So I found a lot of research on the works cited pages of your papers that did not meet the peer-reviewed scholarship requirements, okay? And we need to be improving upon that. And even though I only have a 2 minimum peer-reviewed sources, that doesn't mean that once you find 2, you should stop at 2. Keep doing that research. When you're working with an academic paper, you're not just trying to find the bottom line, you're trying to find whatever research you need to support your position and inform you of the topic, the background, what people are thinking about it, right? So it's important not to just stop at 2, because that's just not going to give you a robust perspective, and you may actually limit yourself in terms of the research and information you need to produce a strong argument, produce a strong solution. All right, so let's use as an example the, close this. I'm going to use the example of who should we save during COVID-19, a triage plan for hospitals short on equipment. So a triage plan for hospitals is one kind of keyword search we can complete. And also, who should we save during COVID-19? We won't necessarily get scholarly research on COVID-19 itself, because peer-reviewed research actually has to go through a peer review process, and typically that process takes from the date of a paper being accepted or the date of the paper, the author's submitting a paper to an academic publisher, whether it's a journal or a book, to actually it being published is at minimum a year, right? So we just haven't been in COVID long enough, but that doesn't mean we can't find peer-reviewed research. So let's go to that. And I want to remind everyone that you need to download the, if you have the Cisco VPN already downloaded on your desktop or on your phone, you can do that research through there, but you also have to sign into the library. So I already signed into the library. First I went onto our web and I signed in there, and then I went over to the library and it said, and I put in my search term of Rory Moore, and it said sign in for more results. And once I sign in, if you notice here, let's see. Oh, good. So I'm actually I'll sign in here, right? Because I think that so when you go to UCR library and you're doing a library search, journal search, you can see this sign in over here. I'm going to do that through my UCR Net ID. So there's a library sign in as well. So even though on our web and I'm signed in, which gets me into iLearn and all that, I also have to sign in over here. And because I already did, you notice now, if you don't see your name in the upper right-hand corner, you're not signed in, which means that you're not going to be able to do the type of research you need, okay? So I like to use a library search that begins with Melville. So let me just put in a keyword search term, and if we are starting with the who should we save during COVID-19, then a keyword would be somewhat like morality or moral philosophy, saving lives. Let's do that, right? And we want to think about looking for, see how I'm just kind of scanning the books and the articles. And what I'm seeing here is actually two that are really going to be helpful. The first is this. It's peer reviewed. You see that it said signals peer review. If you were curious, Philosophy and Public Affairs, 2006 Summer, volume 34-3. Here are the page numbers, page 312. Let's take a look, because we also want to make sure that it's what we're looking for, which is, even though a journal is peer reviewed, if it's an editorial, it's actually not peer reviewed. So let's take a look on volume 34. And we're gonna go to Wiley Online Library. You could try JSTOR. I'm just gonna go to Wiley, page not found, right? So we go back. You're gonna find that research takes a lot of time. And it's important to do this up front, because then you actually are doing idea generation at the same time, and you can have another screen open to start taking notes, to note who says what, right? So here's Philosophy and Public Affairs. Let's go ahead and look at this particular, there we go, journal. So we're looking at summer, right? Here we go. Front matter beyond the harm principle, valuing health. So it looks like actually that some of these are actually really great. You might want to check out behind the harm principle or valuing health. So this looks like it's a correction. So it might actually take us to, we might actually have to look into a different volume 34, number 2. So we're in number 3, right? Which means we actually have to go back to number 2. So see how you have to do a little bit of sleuthing. 2006. 2006 is a little old, but depending on the topic, it's okay. But typically, anything you're going to use in to cite research studies or to get the most up-to-date theory, then you want to at least have it be within 5 years would be perfect. Within 10 years is fine. And that's a general rule of thumb. So saving lives, moral theory, and the claims of individuals. And here's how it starts. Have you a duty to save the greater rather than the lesser number from death when you cannot save all? Oh, this sounds great, right? So this is moral philosophy that will help me if I were researching, if I wanted to propose a triage plan for hospitals so that they can figure out what is best. This would be where I would start. I would read about moral philosophy on this topic, and I would take notes and cite page numbers. I would paraphrase, or if I want to quote, I would copy and paste so I could quote. I would make sure that this goes on to my my works cited as well. But what I do with this is I read it, and it gets me starting to think about, okay, I'd want to provide background information here on moral philosophy, as well as background information on why there needs to be a triage plan, which is that we don't have enough, at least I'm going to be specific about equipment. We don't have enough equipment. So this is a problem that needs to be solved, okay? And so this is the paper that I would want to look at. Additionally, right, here is triage in situations of mass casualty. And so when you're here, just because it didn't signal that it's not peer reviewed doesn't mean that it isn't peer reviewed, right? So we want to go to the source. Here we see the Oxford Scholarship Online. It looks like we can actually get this chapter, which is excellent. Don't think you can't get really top-notch scholarship online, right? So published to Oxford Scholarship Online. This is, let's see, this is an abstract, right? This is chapter 12, Setting Healthcare Priorities, What Ethical Theories Tell Us. So here is not only just looking at the article on moral philosophy and saving lives, but also here, healthcare priorities, like what do you want to consider are your healthcare priorities? How can those be informed by ethical theories? Hey, this is exactly what I'm interested in because I have to learn this to then propose a solution. And I also have to reference it to my readers to show like, hey, I'm credible. I'm going to the sources that have done this type of thinking for hundreds of years. I'm getting some background in it. It's going to inform the decisions I'm going to make in my solution paper, right? So here's some abstract moral theory, but here, what ethical theories tell us about healthcare priorities in real life, right? So theory is always in the brain, right? You're not really grounded. But when you think about real life, here is chapter 10. Here we have mass casualties. So that could align with a pandemic, right? So although we don't have COVID-19 pandemic here, we do have mass casualty. We do have triage as a key word, saving lives, emergency. So this chapter would be excellent for us to be working with, okay? So moving beyond that, let's find some other ways to find peer-reviewed sources. So another way would be to use scholar.google.com, right? And you need to put in scholar.google.com, otherwise you're just going to get to a regular search engine, which doesn't access the scholarship. So when you come here, then you need to put in moral philosophy. You know, I'm just going to do another kind of keyword search, saving lives. Let's say emergency. Right? I bet you will have some of the same hits. Emergency department triage and ethical analysis, right? Well, this looks really promising. It's been cited by 125, which shows that it has some respectability and credibility, but it's also being published. Let's go here, and then we're going to get back to this page because I want to show you something else. But let's go here, and here are the authors. I'm just going to accept these cookies. And it's BMC Emergency Medicine, issue 11, article number 16. If we look at the citation of the article, this is an APA citation, so you want to change it to MLA. BMC Emergency Med is the journal. This is absolutely academic, right? You're on Scholar, Google Scholar, you're seeing all of the markers for this. You also could go to UC eLinks because we have them since I signed into our library, right? So you can get the selected full text directly from the library, and essentially when you sign into the library, you're going to have a lot more opportunity to find scholarly sources. So related articles, right? This is such a wonderful feature of Google because it expands the search into related articles. Here, triage and medicine, underlying values and principles. This might help us to get a kind of general scope of it. Ethics. Oh, disaster and mass casualty triage. It's the American Medical Association Journal of Ethics. Terrific, right? I probably want to look at that. I could star it since I'm signed in. I signed in, you see my little picture up here. I signed in to our mail Google, so I could just star it. And where is it? Disaster and mass casualty triage. It saves it to my library then. Underlying values. So I'm just going to star these, and then it's saved to my library, and they're all here, so I can come back to them later. Though if I want to access them here, I'm going to have to be signed into both my Google RMail account and signed into the library and have global checks. So when you get an article online, that doesn't mean you don't have a page number. Academic articles always have a page number. So when you look at the PDF, right, here we have a nice abstract, but the page number is always going to be at the bottom of a page or another place. And the expectation is if you're paraphrasing, summarizing, or quoting from a source, if there's a page number, you have to use that page number. To not do so is not ethical. It's also a little bit lazy, and it doesn't help your readers to navigate to the exact article too, which could be helpful for them if they're reading you because they want to have a better understanding of the various views out there, right? And so maybe they'll go to your works cited page to see, oh, well, let me read more on what informed this writer's view because it's really interesting to me. And so you need to be able to offer that. So here, those are the two ways for peer-reviewed scholarship that I'd most recommend, okay? And now let's extend out to the appropriate types of secondary, primary source material that would be acceptable. I know I just said acceptable redundancy there, thinking on the spot, for academic papers. Okay, so let's just go to Google. Let's go to now, because we can look in the present, coronavirus triage ethics. Let's see if that helps us anywhere. We have some, oh look, responding to novel coronavirus, care during the coronavirus pandemic. I'm not sure if this would be scholarly, though. Let me see. It might, you might hear my children. Okay, so this one is actually current. It's about dermatology care, so I'm not sure that that would actually help us a lot. Here we have Vox.com, coronavirus triage, the grim ethical dilemma of rationing, right? Of rationing, medical care explained, how hospitals decide which patients to prioritize. Well, this would be really helpful. Vox is actually a credible source here. Vox is on the journalism side of things, so it is not considered a skeptical source. And what's really nice about this article in my research for the paper that I'm hypothetically writing is that when I'm proposing a solution, I can't just propose one out of thin air because my readers might say, yeah, but did you think about this, which so-and-so is doing, or that, which, you know, Massachusetts General employed, or did you see how a similar plan to yours is not working in New York City, right? So you need to collect data on what hospital triage during coronavirus looks like now. And here offering this kind of overview could help in that. So that's something I'm going to take a look at. It doesn't mean I'm going to use it, right? I like this, Journal of Ethics, COVID-19 Ethics Resource Center. So this is not peer reviewed, but a Journal of Ethics is, AMA Journal of Ethics is a wonderful resource because while they do have peer reviewed articles, right? But these are sources they've compiled to help the medical practitioners to work through the types of ethical dilemmas they'll find themselves in, right? So here then, this is an excellent resource for you if you're writing this paper to understand what what the landscape is in terms of what the medical field is thinking about, right? Because even if you're not in the medical field, that doesn't mean you're excused from having to consider that position because you're proposing a solution in the medical field. So you need to be informed, you need to self-educate for a bit, all right? Now, there are so many sources here that you could use, right? Here's the Affordable Care Act architect Ezekiel Emanuel on coronavirus triage ethics. New York Magazine, it's a good source. Here we have PTSD waiting to happen, bioethicist. So this might be interesting. But again, I'm trying to propose a solution. So here is triage. Triage is really determining who moves past, but PTSD is perhaps part of that. So you might, while you were maybe doing just a process approach, all of a sudden when you're researching, you might learn that, hey, it's not just about the person that I'm trying to save, but I need to be considering mental health as well and PTSD. Let me read about more of that. It's really interesting. Maybe it can inform my solution because I'm learning more. Okay, so New York Magazine is fine. Annals.org. Again, you need to look up what is annals.org, right? Annals of Internal Medicine. So yes, here it's showing that I have access to this because I am signed into the UCR library. And here we have, it's free, probably because it's about COVID and a lot of COVID related data, usually behind a paywall for subscriptions to magazines or newspapers, a lot of those publishers are offering it free. But this one looks really wonderful, right? So I would do that. And that's not necessarily a peer-reviewed source, although it's connected to a journal that is peer-reviewed and high-end scholarship. So CNN's fine for secondary source material. New York Times is fine, LA Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, AP, Reuters, all of that is fine, right? These are names of newspaper publishers that have respectability and credibility within the US population and within journalism itself. That doesn't necessarily mean that they all have the same kind of viewpoint. So when you go to something like, let me see if it's Media Matters, maybe it's not Media Matters. Let me look at bias in newspaper, which newspapers are, I'm forgetting the name of the title of the site. Here we go. We're not going to go to Wikipedia. Here we have University of Michigan. Where do news sources fall on the political bias spectrum? So this is really important to have a sense of because we do work through newspaper articles a lot, and we want to consider that. Here we have All Sides is a news website. We want to consider when we're thinking about the credibility of a source or using that source as a solid support for a particular position, you really need to be clarifying with your readers any biases that might exist within that. So Pew Research Center, political polarization, great. Survey data reveals the news source favored by people according to their political beliefs. I would probably bookmark this page because I'm not going to memorize all of that, but I am going to want to come back here to understand let's see if I can get. So these are surveys that might be helpful, but I'm not sure it's what I was looking for. So Pew Research, by the way, is excellent research. It's also not peer reviewed. So it's, you know, their research is top notch, but when I'm asking you, this is like the tertiary type of resource that you could use in terms of solid data and statistics. But if you can see, then you want to, here we go, chart of media political bias. Allsides.com, that was mentioned on the Michigan chart. So here we have really on the far left, right? A little slightly on the left, center, right, a little right on the left, and then far right. And so you notice here that on the far left, we have CNN Opinion, Alternate, Democracy Now! All of these are on the far left, all right? New York Times Opinion, you're gonna get the far left. Here, Fox News Opinion, you're gonna get the very far right, right? So these are this is the range. If you're looking to get a center perspective, these are the resources, the journalism resources you're going to want to use. If you are looking for slightly left, these are the resources, right? Slightly right, these are the resources. When they say online news only, that means that they're not saying what the Fox News live television programming is, because that one is actually going to be even further right. But on the online news, they're saying it's a little right of center. Okay, and that's important to understand and also signal to your readers. So the last thing I would say is that if all of your research is being done on a basic Google or other web browser search engine, you are not doing college level research. It is not academic enough. If you aren't being really thoughtful about where you're going for your research, it is not college level research, right? You need to always be looking at the sources, not just the authors, but also the sources. Okay, are there any questions on this part of things? Anyone? No? Okay. So let me return to my overview here. I want to make sure I keep coming through. Okay, credible sources and academic papers, we just talked about that. Crediting sources, we're going to look at that now. Okay. So in crediting sources, I'm going to show you my a paper that I've modified to fit MLA format that is being published currently. It'll come out next winter, I think. So let me do a new share. Let me come here. You've already seen this paper because I showed it to you to offer you the title. And so I'm going to come down here. I'm going to bypass the abstract. I'm going to give you the introduction, right? A brief introduction. Oh, I'm going to bypass this. This is more like before we actually get to the paper. This is how I even came across wanting to solve this problem and launch this program. So chapter overview then is some basic information that identifies the role that mentoring has in improving student success, right? So when we talk about it in your papers, and I want to let you know, the university is experiencing a significant spike in plagiarism and cheating. I had to report a third of my classes. So I have 3 classes, about 60 students. I had to report about 20 of my students for plagiarism. A lot of that plagiarism came from what we call exploitative paraphrasing, which is that you, a student or somebody is reading others' material and just rephrases enough and puts it into their document, maybe not even purposely, but doesn't cite it, right? So I'm going to show you how even if you know things to be true because you've done work in the field, like me, I still need to cite solid evidence, even when I'm paraphrasing, even if it seems like a common truth, right? So it is no surprise for those working in higher education in the United States and elsewhere that students benefit from mentoring relationships. And then here, the word mentor has been difficult to parse because of the looseness of its signification, right? So here you might have a definition or some kind of discussion. This might seem like a phrase that I could just pull out of a hat, but this is actually in my research. I came across research on mentorship and the difficulty in understanding how people view mentorship because it's so varied. So I have to cite the source that I'm paraphrasing, right? Both with the author and the page number. And you notice because I didn't, I don't have to integrate with a signal phrase necessarily in this sentence where the source comes from. I like a lot of variety in quotation and citation so that my readers are interested, right? So here's the paraphrase. Here I'm going to use a signal phrase and an introduction of the authors. So however, in their cross-discipline, meticulous review of the literature on mentoring, right? So I'm giving a sense of what their paper is about. I then name Tammy Allen and Lillian Ebby, and I give their credentials, right? Psychology professors at, and I list their university affiliations, have identified common factors present in mentorship, right? And then I list these common factors. They are part paraphrase, right? Because a paraphrase is that you can quote key words or phrases, but you're also not taking it word for word because you're integrating some of your own language as well. So this is a really long sentence. It actually goes all the way down here because it's a single sentence, and because I am using semicolons, I don't need to put it in text after every quote because it's from the same source and it's a single sentence. So since I signaled in the sentence that Allen and Ebby are the authors, at the end of the sentence, I just use the page number that my readers can go to find this information. Okay, here is another paraphrase, right? But a paraphrase also is just an assessment of the research, which may come from multiple sources. So when students connect with faculty, either through a formal mentor-protege process or through an informal self-selected undertaking, studies show, and I saw this phrasing in many of the papers, studies show that academic gains and retention rates generally are greater than those achieved by non-mentored student groups. Well, if I'm saying studies show, even if I don't want to go into the studies themselves, I have to cite my sources, right? So that I have backup evidence. It's actually and. This was APA format, so I clearly didn't change it, but I needed to because I'm just making up page numbers to show you right now because APA doesn't do the same thing. So you notice the commas are omitted as well. 541, right? So studies show that. So if you're referencing studies, but you're not going to be talking about them because, you know, this is in your introduction and you don't want to bog down your paper with a super lengthy introduction, then you need to be just offering the sources parenthetically. All right. So here then, it's just my own language, my own assessment, again, the same. Here I go into background, right? So if this is part of the introduction, this is a 25-page paper, so I actually have more time to keep introducing, and this is what I do. In APA, you put a background here, but this is all part of my, my introduction as well. And you notice here that external and systemic factors face college attending foster youth in the US. And then I list those, right? And I see a lot of this in your papers that you're listing things that clearly aren't, isn't information you undertook studies to determine, or that you, did the original criticism on, or study on, or anything, right? You haven't published anything necessarily. Here, I need to support these claims I'm making. And I'm also paraphrasing here, right? And so if I'm saying that these are happening, I need to offer that parenthetical citation of all the sources where this comes from, where many sources identify these, right? You can do one. In APA, you want to offer more, but also I found more that really just coordinated here, and this is a published academic paper, so there's a higher expectation to have a more breadth of research. But here, this isn't my assessment. These circumstances directly contribute to the plight of foster youths, etc., right? So notice here, I didn't cite Gross in this because Gross was talking about something else, but it directly contributes, right? The circumstances that foster youth face put them at a higher risk, as a higher risk population than first generation or low income students outside of foster care. So although this may sound like a claim I'm making, it's not my claim. And if you're making a claim that isn't your claim because it's been informed by information from elsewhere, you need to cite it, right? And then I just keep citing and citing. If I have statistics and it's all in one sentence, I cite where it's from. Here's another source that offers other statistics. I cite where it's from, right? Here's my analysis of those two statistical analyses, right? And then here is my assessment that it's necessary, given all this background I've offered, all of the research on mentoring, this is our assessment, right? And here, from a position of social justice, this is framing the argument, okay? And so even when you're proposing a solution, you want to frame the argument. If I am writing that solution paper on whose lives to save, I'm framing it in terms of moral philosophy, the ethics of medical care. And that's my frame, so I have to provide that background. And that's why I have to do that research and offer that background. All right, are there any questions about the need to cite even if you're not direct quoting? Paraphrase and summary is called indirect quoting. And if you are continuing to quote from the same source, you still need to use signal phrases to indicate that that information is coming from the same source. So let's say we have here 23%, right? So Redford is 44 for this statistical data. If I'm adding more statistical data, my readers can't assume that this sentence is and this information continues from Redford. So I have to put that information in the parenthetical citation. I also could say something like John Redford, lead author on the study of lower income students versus on lower income student matriculation rates, also identifies that 23%, right? And then I would just have to have the 45. If this was not my summary here, the 18 to 20 and 50 to 52 point gaps, I could use a signal phrase like, he also compares these 18 to 20 and 50 to 52 point gaps between foster youth and first generation and continuing generation students to come to the conclusion that the disparity is vast, right? So that he also, and then putting the page number here, if I were to do that, that's what you would want to do. All right, so essentially, you need to cite any information that informs your views. You need to cite if you are incorporating data or statistic, or even a list of information that seems obvious, but is not common knowledge. All right, so I have a question here. What if some sources don't have page numbers? I found that some of my sources for Project One did not provide page numbers. Okay, so great question, and MLA has an answer to that. So what you would want to go to is chapter 20 of your e-guide, but in summation, and Sierra, I don't know if you were if you joined us late, but any scholarly articles, even if they're articles online, have page numbers because journals have page numbers. So even if the journals are published it online, they have accompanying page numbers. So you will find that on those sources, or you will download the PDF and it will offer those page numbers. Now for a single web page, you don't have to put in a page number. You just put the name of the web page in quotes, okay? For a web page that, let me new share, for a web page that, okay, so and I hope you all got, you tabbed this source as well on your computer or took a note in terms of where to find it, allsides.com, because it's the media bias chart. So you would want to have this bookmarked so you understand where your journalism material falls based on where you're getting it from. So let's say that we're citing, let's just say we're talking about media bias. And so we want to cite this website. What we would do is the title on our works cited would actually be quotes around media bias chart, because this is the page on the allsides.com website. So media bias chart, right? So you'd have this as the entry on your works cited page, in quotes, media bias chart. And then later on you would list the website. So in your paper, after you signal or paraphrase and want to put it in parentheses, the source, you would put in parentheses, quote, and in quotes, media bias chart, okay? Now, if you're looking at another page on allsides.com, you would want to, let's say just this, okay, this story, 20.5 million jobs lost in April. That is the name of the article or the website link. So that's what comes first in your works cited, and that's what you would put in parenthetical citation in the paper itself. So when you have a longer title, you actually are permitted to shorten it. And so I would suggest you're permitted to shorten it in the parenthetical citations in the text. I would suggest shortening it to 20.5 million jobs, because you can shorten it so it doesn't take up a lot of extra space and distract your readers from continuing on with reading. But what you shorten it to needs to be exactly what starts the works cited entry on your works cited page. So that's essentially how you would account for that, okay? For no page numbers. Does that help? Are there other questions about citation? Great. Okay, so it looks like everybody's kind of on the same page there. And again, this is recording, so if you've missed out on some of the conversation today, you can certainly jump in. So I have another question. Can we use paragraph numbers for articles? Yes, you can. If it's a single page website, like you're going to New York Times. I love New York Times. I think they do excellent reporting. I know the opinions are biased. All opinion is biased. So the New York Times opinion is a little left, but actually I think it says far left biased for their opinion, but not their regular reporting. So can we use paragraph numbers for articles? You can. You can now in MLA format, if you were going to be using, let me show you here. I'm gonna go back to this page. So if you're using, I have so many on. If you are using paragraph numbers for an article, the MLA citation would be the author, or if it's not an author, the name of the article, but I'm gonna say more. And for paragraphs, this is odd about MLA. you actually put a comma, whereas when we use the when we use typical MLA with a page number, we do not have a comma. But then you just put paragraph 3, right? And then they can find it. Can you start that, please? Start with Ali? Okay. Sorry, I have to get off in a few minutes. I have an appointment that is beginning right now. So the last thing I want to mention is academic integrity. So I know that with a lot of the academic misconduct that I had to submit to SCAPE this past time, a lot of the students didn't really understand what they were doing as being academically dishonest. That a lot of what happened was a lack of citing sources for those ideas, for those paraphrases. And one of the reasons why we push academic integrity so much is, first of all, a basic ethical position that you need to credit others' work, that it's dishonest, and that it leads to poor scholarship, and it also leads to a lack of truth and transparency. But in addition to that, you then are profiting off of others, and it's just this whole cycle where you present yourself as a dishonest person. And it can cripple your, not only your college career, but also your professional career. Lots of people in the news in the last decade even have lost really important jobs because of being dishonest, either on their resumes or on you know, information they submitted that they try to pass off as their own projects or what have you. And so, and it happens at every level. I believe that Martin Luther King Jr. even plagiarized a bit in his dissertation. And that's just to say that it can happen. And all of us need to be really cautious and precise about marking where we get our ideas. And so in the research phase, not in the writing phase, you should have these ideas listed. You should have a document about it. You should have all the sources listed. You can have your articles, all of your research, put it into a folder on your computer, or I don't know if you, I know some of you do this on your phone, it makes it a little harder, but collect that research so that you don't all of a sudden go, I don't know where that came from, so I'm just gonna write it out. It was a great idea. It's not your idea, I can tell. Most of this stuff isn't caught by SafeAssign, it's caught by faculty that understands practices of citation and crediting. But here are a couple quotes from a paper that I was forwarded after I kind of shared with my program administrators sort of the alarming increase that the university and I myself have noted in the uptick in plagiarism in particular. There were a few cheating cases in terms of students submitting work or portions of work that they had submitted for prior classes here at the university. That is also, well, that's cheating. It's not necessarily plagiarizing, though you are plagiarizing in a sense yourself. Okay, so here is the, what is the theory? No, let me see if I have it up. Where, no. Okay, so I want to go to, yeah, I'm not going to be able to show you the source right now, but it's from a source by Graham Scott. So Graham Scott is the author. He's done, it was a really well, much cited resource that also got grant funding because it was so important, right? So basically what happens when you are not doing the critical thinking and instead working to have others think for you through using their ideas, what happens is that here we have some statements. These are quotes from the article. Basically, the same majors that fare poorly in assessment gains related to communication and critical thinking also self-report higher rates of overall cheating in surveys. So education, business, and there was a third one, are the majors that have the most, I think maybe physical science, have the most levels of cheating in the writing, especially in the writing processes. But that doesn't mean that other majors also don't. But here is an interesting fact. So students who go to college primarily to earn money appear more likely to cheat than those attending for personal enrichment. And then of course the overemphasis on grades can encourage such behaviors. So first of all, you know, if an external motivating factor like money, which is part of why many of us go to college, which is we want to have the ability to do more in our lives. And oftentimes the college degree permits that, it opens doors. That's a fact, right? We should all acknowledge that and acknowledge that it will permit us to earn more money over our lifetime than a high school diploma. But if that's your only purpose in going to college, you need to be aware that that's going to open you up to being not across the board, right? Because everybody's different. But those who cheat are more likely just to be attending college to earn more money because they don't see necessarily the value in attending college to actually learn. They're doing it to get the degree and get out, okay? And that's not to say that there are those, and I think this is more the majority, who are going to college for to better themselves and their families' lives and get that degree to enter into careers that are fulfilling and also that will earn them more money. But they're also really interesting in learning, mastering goals, intrinsic motivation, right? So if you are interested in self-improvement, you're going to be less likely to purposely cheat, right? And I know that a lot of the plagiarism that happened this past time was unintentional. Nevertheless, it still needs to be reported. So those suggest that conditions which promote learning curb dishonesty, while those which promote dishonesty curb learning, right? And those conditions mean those external versus internal intrinsic motivations or the desire to learn, right? If you want to be learning, you're going to be doing the hard work of learning. So here is something that's really significant. So if a third of students coming out of college report that they experience no improvements in their writing or critical thinking from the start of college to the end, and that the exact same number, 36%, also self-reported, different students, so we're just finding a correlation, but we can't jump to a logical fallacy, but it's also really interesting data, right? 36% of students self-report that they also plagiarize or cheat in college. So if students aren't making gains in writing and critical thinking, often this is because, or in plagiarism or cheating, it's because it's a thought reduction strategy. A student doesn't want to put in the time and effort to do the heavy thinking that will get them to learn a bit. And what this does is it actually leaves them deprived of the strategies that they would have developed had they worked through those mental feats, right? And a feat is something that it's hard, right? And so hard work is going to be sometimes a drudge, but it's going to improve your critical thinking and writing strategies as well as your reading. And when you don't take cognitive shortcuts, you're actually going to show more improvement even if you're struggling through it, right? And again, you don't have to struggle through on your own. I am here, the Writing Center is here, and you can ask me questions. You can come to office hours. We can struggle through it together. Finally, and I have to be getting off, and I thank all of you for being here, but for plagiarists, I want to just point this last thing out. Merely copying another person's material, even with tweaks to the wording, meaning paraphrasing or, uncrediting it, it's unlikely to produce any gains in writing or critical thinking. And so if you don't, the results of this study at its bottom line suggests that if you don't learn in these incremental amounts, you don't continue to learn. So you're setting yourself back. You're not actually gaining the skills and building on the skills and developing bit by bit a more critical, deep understanding of the practices of writing, but also the critical thinking, problem solving you need to improve. So that's just an idea of, if you're tempted to plagiarize or cheat, or if you know others who do, it's really a disservice to yourself overall, and you're likely to see it across your coursework in terms of the types of grades you can earn and the types of memory, deep learning that you gain, because you're just not putting in that learning effort that produces more learning, right? It's like the rich get richer because they have capital to build upon, just like learners get richer in learning because they're building on that capital of learning that they keep socking away. Okay, so that's a really, I think, positive way to conclude today. Any last brief questions, or otherwise I'm probably gonna go because I'm 15 minutes late to my next meeting. We all set? Okay, perfect. Well, when Zoom processes this, I'll post onto our website the recorded video, so you can come back and reference this in case you didn't take notes during it, or you just want to hear what I had to say one more time. And I hope you enjoy your weekend, and I look forward to starting this all over with you again next week. And I, of course, am responding to emails today.